Well, look who's back. Welcome back, guys, to the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. It's been a minute since I've done a video on this channel about the world of pro wrestling and sports entertainment. There's been a lot of stuff going on, a lot of life stuff, a lot of happy life stuff that has caught a lot of my attention. Some really good things coming down the line, but it has eaten up a lot of my time and I haven't been able to talk about wrestling as much as I wanted to, but I did want to talk about wrestling and catch up with what's going on because there's so many things happening. But before we get into that, I want to remind you guys that absolutely, when I take a week and a half off from doing videos, it is actually very, very helpful if you hit the like button, the subscribe button, and the notification bell, because it does help other wrestling fans know about this channel and that I'm actually doing videos again. So I appreciate it very much. If you enjoyed this video at all, do give that like button a gentle little tap. But let's talk about wrestling and what has gone on in wrestling over the last week and a half or 2 weeks. So Sakura Genesis happened. I'll start with New Japan last weekend. God, it's been so long. It's amazing how it's been so long. Now, I'll confess to you guys what actually happened with that. I recorded an entire review of Sakura Genesis, and then the other things that are going on in my life happened the very next day that called all of my attention. And by the time I got time to get and edit the video and put it together, and which takes about an hour to do each one of these, other things kept popping up, and by the time I could do it, it was like Thursday, and I was like, all right, well, it's old news now. But to recap it very quickly, my thoughts on Sakura Genesis, I thought it was a really damn good show. Obviously, the big news coming out of it is SANADA, who is now with just 5 guys. We remember when they were just 4 guys on January 5th. There's a lot of 4 and 5s here. They were saying that they were going to change New Japan, and most of us, somebody yelled at me for saying all of us, most of us laughed at that notion. And here we are now in mid-April, and they were right. SANADA is the new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion, finally defeating Kazuchika Okada, winning the big one from Okada, winning the championship. And now this new SANADA with the new look and the new attitude and the new sense of urgency definitely is he's definitely a lot better than what I thought he was going to be in this role. Now, he is getting a bit of a second fiddle role. I don't think he's quite gotten to that range of being looked at as the main event guy. He is the champion. He is a main event guy now, but I think it's going to take a couple of title defenses, maybe when he gets to V3, V4 for people, and have some really outstanding matches for people to really, really buy into SANADA. But we're all rooting for him. We've been rooting for SANADA for a very long time, and I hope that he does emerge as the next pillar of New Japan Pro Wrestling, as a lot of people have expected him to be for a while. Okada, however, he has now moved on into the tag ranks, which brings up the interesting things that are going on in the tag division in New Japan, which we have, yes, Aussie Open is now dual champions in New Japan. They defeated Kazuchika Okada and Hiroshi Tanahashi along with the Motor City Machine Guns for the NJPW Strong Tag Titles, and at Sakura Genesis, they defeated Bishamon for the IWGP Tag Team Championships, and in both shows, Kyle Fletcher nearly killed himself. In the Sakura Genesis show, and I'm sure some of you have seen this by now, if you haven't seen it, by the way, that is one of the best matches of the month. You have to see Bishamon versus Aussie Open for the IWGP Tag Titles. And that is a fantastic tag match. And just this added little thing with Fletcher doing the moonsault outside. He hits the moonsault, but then bangs the back of his head on the metal guardrail, and then gets this giant gash over, I think it was over his ear. So they kind of like Finn Balor had at WrestleMania in the Hell in a Cell thing. They kind of bandaged him up. They didn't give him a numbing agent, but they just kind of bandaged him up. He kept on performing in the match for another 10 minutes, doing every spot he could, taking bumps and everything else. And the crowd was already kind of behind Aussie Open, Aussie, oi, oi, oi. But they were even more into them, seeing how much Fletcher was gutting out. And then we get to the Collision in DC show, which I was supposed to be at, by the way, and I didn't get to go, and I bought tickets, so that's $150 down the drain. But I wasn't able to go to that show because of things that are going on. And I'm so bummed I missed that show, because Aussie Open and the superpowers of Hiroshi Tanahashi and Kazuchika Okada and the Motor City Machine Guns, they had a great main event tag team match Absolutely excellent. And Fletcher in this match does another moonsault, but this time, instead of him bumping his head against the guard railing, he then crashes his entire ribs and his groin over the steel barricade. They didn't win the match though. And Fletcher, after the match, is on the microphone and he's like, yeah, you know, we are now obviously dual champions. We're the best tag team in the world, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And the crowd starts chanting for FTR. And he goes, that's some BS right there. That Ospreay influence, man. You're starting to see now with the United Empire, and in particular Aussie Open now, especially with them getting such big press over the last couple of months. Not just from this, but also, you know, Mark Davis and the New Japan Cup and everything else. You're seeing the influence of Will Ospreay, his style, his tree now starting to grow throughout the wrestling world. And we've seen this in the past. Obviously, you know, Dusty had his tree that grew, and Vince has his guys, and there were Crockett guys, there were Fritz von Erich guys, and world class guys, there were Paul Heyman guys. There are people who are under these trees, the Clique, you know, all of these different groups, the Elite. Now we have a very distinct Will Ospreay style of wrestler and a clique that is now really making some waves in the wrestling community. And Will Ospreay, by the way, is now cleared to wrestle. He did do an Instagram, however, that was a little disheartening because he said he doesn't know how much longer the ride's going to go. He's getting banged up. He's in his early 30s now, I believe. And he says his arm's still feeling weak, but he's going to try to get as much as he can out of it. Now, that's interesting because, again, the thought is that this might be his last year in New Japan. I don't know if he's going to go to AEW or WWE. I mean, Will has expressed several times before he doesn't want to go to WWE, but that changes. You know, never say never to that kind of stuff. I would think if he thinks he's only got maybe 2 or 3 years left, maybe you want to go to WWE just to try it out, just to do it. But I think, as we all know, some big stuff might be coming up this year for Will Ospreay that would absolutely solidify him as a big guy. But we're going to talk about that in a little bit. Back to the Aussie Open thing. After the match, it was kind of apparent to me now where we're going. At least one match for Forbidden Door show coming up, which is going to be FTR, the AEW Tag Team Champions, against the NJPW Strong and IWGP Tag Champions, Aussie Open. This is a rematch from a match they had last year in Europe, which was a kind of an underappreciated match of the year contender last year. Was Aussie Open versus FTR last year. We're going to get to see the rematch. People have been wanting that rematch. People wanted it at Wrestle Kingdom. We didn't get it. But now it looks like we're really heading towards that for Forbidden Door. Since I'm mentioning Forbidden Door, let's walk through that door and go over to the AEW side of things. Obviously, I haven't given my words on camera about what I thought about it, but the huge news of them doing Wembley Stadium for All In, the return of the name All In, it is, again, I have said this before, it is back to the spirit of what AEW originally was. That gambler spirit that Cody, the Bucks, and Omega took at the early days, the very first All In, even back before that when they were doing Being the Elite and Ring of Honor and New Japan. And that kind of, and it's kind of interesting the last month or so. Things have been kind of weird for the last year, but AEW now feels like AEW again. Like there's this, and the feeling and what I mean by that is that AEW in its first couple years was always this optimism. Like there's brighter things and bigger things to come. We've kind of, ever since Brawl Out, that kind of went away as far as this feeling of optimism and that momentum. But now that's kind of back with them once again taking a big gamble on the Wembley Stadium show. Here's my thing about the Wembley Stadium show, and we're going to do some old school referencing here. I've seen so many people talking about this. Of course, as we know, the pro wrestling online community is full of MBAs. It's full of creators and people who perform in front of live audiences and people who run companies and people who've put on shows and people who have written fiction and crafted long-term stories and all. Okay, actually, it's not. There are actually very few people like that in the wrestling online community. But it's funny to me as a person, and for those of you who are new to my channel, and even those of you who don't know this about me, my history is in performance. I was in theater. I did run raves for 6.5 years. I did promote them. It was very similar to like wrestling. You had to book the shows and book the flights and book the talent and schedule the talent. Who's going on first? Who's going on last? Who hire security, hire sound system, get the lighting, design the advertisement, everything else. You're basically a booker. And we called them promoters in the rave scene back in the 90s and the 2000s. So I've done that, and to varying degrees of success. Some shows were very small. Some shows were way bigger than I thought they would ever be. And I'm also an author. So when I say that in a snarky way, there is a reason I'm snarky about it. Anyway, and there are a couple other ones out there too. I know, like Dave Coco, he's been a wrestling promoter. He is an author. He has run several companies. He knows this thing. It's interesting to me that the people who've actually done these things have such a different take on it than the people in the wrestling community. No offense to where you are in your life, your journey is your journey. But if you haven't done those things, it's not that you can't have an opinion, but you shouldn't try to act like you're an expert on it and make definitive statements. And I've seen so many definitive statements about AEW's All In show in Wembley. Seen everything from they're not going to get 20,000 people to people thinking they're going to sell it out. People keep bringing up the 90,000 number, and I'm like, first off, let's get real. I'm going to get real about this for a second. Wembley Stadium. They're not going to have 90,000 people there. There is almost an impossibility for them to have 90,000 people there. Between the staging and just the logistics of it and everything else, you're probably... Now, I could be wrong about this, by the way, because of the floor seating. But if I'm going off of the old Wembley Stadium that WWF, of course, everyone remembers, 1990... Well, some of us remember and others have heard about it because they weren't even alive at the time. But SummerSlam 1992 with the Hitman Hart defending the IC title against the British Bulldog in the main event, which was one of the greatest matches of all time and one of the greatest events of all time. That event had about 80,000 people at it. And now Wembley has been renovated since then. They tore it down and built up a new one. So it's a different stadium, but it's in the same place. But the seating configuration is kind of the same. I'm not expecting AEW to get 90,000 people there. If they did, I'd be totally shocked. But the logistics are, it's probably going to be seated at max probably for 80,000. If they get as many tickets as they can and put as many people there as they can, you're looking at probably about 80,000 people. I don't know for certain, but just looking up the logistics and the seating configurations and seeing some other events that have happened at the current Wembley Stadium, that seems like the max number that AEW would go for, again, with the staging and the floor seating and everything else. Another thing you have to remember too, people go, well, no, there's no way that they're going to get even 50,000 or 40,000. Couple things about that. In 1992, and I did hear somebody else bring this up, I can't remember who it was, but in 1992, I was a fan at that time. I was actually a fan I was a teenager, so I was old enough to understand what was going on. 1992, wrestling was not popular. In fact, that very same year, a couple months earlier, WrestleMania 8 at the Hoosier Dome, they did not sell out. There were noticeable empty sections of that WrestleMania if you go back and look at the videotape. They couldn't get 65, 68,000 people at the Hoosier Dome for WrestleMania, the biggest show of the year. But that didn't matter because the UK has always been starved for big-time wrestling. Partly of its own fault because the UK had scenes World of Sport. Then there was the resurgence in the 2010s of British wrestling. We all remember that when Progress and all these other companies were showing up, and there was Walter and Zack Sabre Jr. and Marty Scurll, even though we don't talk about him anymore, and Walter, Gunther, and Will Ospreay, and so on and so forth. All these different people and Malachi Black, all these guys coming out of the UK scene. That was really hot in the 2010s, and then they sold out to WWE, and now they're back to where they were, which is starving for big-time wrestling shows instead of making their own. So the UK audience is very, very starved to have big wrestling shoig. Half of the big-name YouTubers on this platform who talk about wrestling are UK-based YouTubers. Almost all of them are the big-time guys in YouTube. Wrestling YouTube are British from the UK, from Europe. They love wrestling. They want that American wrestling over there in the UK. The fact that the pre-orders, which I didn't even know they had pre-orders, and I'm sure if I didn't know, most other people probably didn't know either, because who don't follow it anywhere near as much as I do. 25,000 pre-sale pre-orders to sign up to get on the pre-sale have already been registered. Now, if you think, and I think the number just went up to, last time I looked, I think somebody said it was up to 50,000. So anyway, let's just stick with the 25,000. And again, other people probably made this point by now, but most people buy 2 or 3 tickets. So at that point, at the bare minimum, let's say 25,000 registrations. Let's say half of them, I'm even going to do this. Let's say half of them, 12,500, are just buying a single ticket, and the other half are buying at least 2. Right there, you've already got enough people. Now, in reality is the average is probably going to be, because there will be some people that buy 1 ticket, there will be people to buy 4, be people to buy 2, people buy 3. I think a good average is probably 2 tickets per every registration. Already, they've got 50,000 people interested. So we've already shattered that whole, they're not going to do this number, that number. And I think this is just the pre-order. This is not even a pre-sale. It's the registration for the pre-sale before the actual tickets go online for sale, which is coming up at the beginning of May. I think that AEW is going to surprise. Well, they're not going to. Well, let me put it this way. I don't think they're going to surprise anybody. I don't think anybody's going to be surprised if AEW winds up with 60, 70, 80,000 people at the show. I think the people who are naysaying it either are naysaying it because they want to, because they hate AEW for some weird reason and still call themselves wrestling fans, or they are in denial, or they're just not very bright. But I think most people, I mean, even Eric Bischoff, praised and said this was a huge move, and he's absolutely right, because the Wembley show for AEW is a tremendous. I don't think people really understand how big this is going to be. This is a masterful stroke by Tony Khan, and I try to look at it 5 ways from Sunday to see the negatives, and I'm like, this actually was a very brilliant, shrewd move. It was a brilliant creative move. It was a brilliant business move. It was a brilliant move to spur up the morale in the company, which has been kind of low from everybody, what we've heard for the last 6 months to 9 months. So this is definitely, it's a date that all the guys and girls working at AEW have on their calendar, want to be on that show, are looking forward to. We also have the potential fact that the week afterwards, they're going to do All Out in the States, in Chicago. And that brings up another subject I'll talk about in a second. But all of this stuff, just the visual alone of AEW having 50, 60, 70, 80,000 people at Wembley Stadium. This is something that the WWE does all the time. And this is something that WCW, Impact, and even New Japan never, ever really capitalized on, which is why Vince and his crew were always light years ahead of most of the other wrestling promoters and the presentation of their brand. Tony Khan, I do believe, is smart enough to realize this. And he realizes that part of the reason why WWE feels so big is because they've done these big shows and they have all of this footage of, look at all of the people that were there. That impression works big time. Even when WWE a couple years ago, they had that one pay-per-view where like the entire, I think it was Seth and Becky were headlining it, and like not only just one side of the arena, but even a pay-per-view was dark, was empty. They had a giant curtain up. But even at that, there's still the perception that it's WWE. We've seen them do big things before. If AEW can do this show, and they can at least do this a couple more times, they're going to be able to run a reel of their best hits. Think about that intro we see from WWE in every show. What do they show? All of those big arenas. Even back in the day when I was a kid, we saw that shot of this shot. I'm going to put it on the screen of WrestleMania 3. I don't know how many thousands of times they replayed that. Hogan slamming Andre, the shot that goes to the feeling of your brand, and Tony Khan is trying to give that brand. As he said, he wants to be Pepsi to WWE's Coke, and this is a huge thing. Not only is it a huge thing for this and going forward, it's a huge thing for them getting their foothold in the UK, where they're doing pretty damn good numbers. It is also bragging rights for them to, you know, get rid of the whole WCW 2.0 thing and they're just TNA thing, because let me tell you something. TNA did one of their biggest shows was in the UK, and I think it was around 6, 7, 8,000 people. TNA never had anywhere close to 50,000 people at a show. Even WCW at its heyday, Goldberg, and they probably could have, but the Goldberg-Hogan match at the Georgia Dome, that was 38,000 people. Tony Khan will officially be able to say in the modern era that he is the only person to come close. The promoter, AEW, has come close to what WWE did. And considering what the number is at the end of the day, they might even do better. Now that changes. Again, there's so much, and this is all perception. It's all perception. It has nothing to do with reality. It's the perception of the company that the company is big time. AEW needs this. This is the same thing Vince did in 1986 and 1987 when he did the big show in Toronto and then the big event in Toronto, and then they did their biggest gamble, which was WrestleMania 3. If you read the history of WrestleMania 3, you know that was a huge gamble for WWF at the time, for Vince at the time. He gambled everything on that, and they won big. This All In at Wembley Stadium, I would definitely say it's, and I think other people will probably say this too if they haven't already. This show is AEW's WrestleMania 3. Now, not all is great in AEW these days. There's a couple other weird things going on with the company. CM Punk may or may not be coming back. Apparently, he's going to be having a meeting with Chris Jericho and Tony Khan and some other people. I don't know what's going on with that. Now, you know they're trying to get Punk back. If they're going to be doing Forbidden Door, All In, and then they're going to do another All Out in Chicago the week after All In, then there's rumors of this AEW Collision show on Saturdays. That's a whole other thing I'm going to talk about in a second too. But CM Punk coming back to AEW, I didn't think it was going to be possible 6 months ago. But now, given what Dax has said about it, we're seeing some things that CM Punk has said, kind of thinking about CM Punk. And I said this at the time. I don't know. I thought he might probably just go to WWE just to spite them. But I don't think, and well, we know CM Punk's issue is not with Tony Khan. I don't think CM Punk wants to go out to hurt Tony Khan. He has probably far more likable relationship with Tony Khan than he has with Vince McMahon, who's by the way, Vince is running WWE again, by the way, and than Vince McMahon or Triple H. So the problem that CM Punk has is it's with the Elite, but now it's also with Jericho, and now it's also with Jon Moxley, because I watched Moxley and Renee's podcast a couple weeks ago, and Mox is like, I don't want to get drawn into this childish bullshit. I just want, why are we doing this? So CM Punk, it sounds, I don't know. I like CM Punk. I've said it before. Him and I share the same birthday. I want to, from fellow Scorpio to fellow Scorpio, I want him to do good. I was excited when he came back. I thought he did wonderful the first couple of months he was there. But the brawl out thing, I'm not a fan of it. I'm not a fan of the fact now we're going to have to deal with a bunch of morons thinking that, oh, see, it wasn't work. It wasn't work the whole time. We told you. I'm not even going to get into it, because when I start trying to talk logic with people online, it just makes my brain hurt, because I can't believe. Sometimes I have a hard time believing that people are as dumb as they seem to be, but which is why I'm very actually happy, as a side note, to come back on YouTube and do this one, because I realize one of the things that makes me happy to talk about wrestling online is when I do videos and I get to read the comment section from you guys, because most of you guys, 90% of you guys, not only are very savvy about wrestling, and so a lot of you know more about some things that are going on in other places than I do, but you actually make good points. You actually have thought out, real thought out stuff. That's not crazy people talk. They're like, you actually have thought out things. So that's why I'm happy to be back. I'm happy for you guys. I'm happy to see you guys again in the comment section. I can't wait to read the ones on this video. But let's talk about that AEW Collision thing now. So the rumor is that they're going to have a Saturday show. It's rumored to be from 8 to 10, a 2-hour show on Saturdays on most likely TNT, could be TBS, probably TNT. The show, that's got a lot of issues. Now, I, of course, was hoping that it was 6:05 on Saturdays because I'm old school and that's what I grew up with, man. 6:05 on Saturdays. We'll get to that in a second, too. But I've seen a lot of people going, well, this is, Tony Khan's going to bring back CM Punk and make that the CM Punk show and then keep them separated from the Elite and split the roster and everything. Now, he might do that. I don't think that's a good idea. I kind of don't think I'm leaning more towards that they're not going to do that than they would. But again, I don't know. I'm not Tony Khan. No, I wouldn't be a fan. I don't think that's a good idea, personally for me. But that's just me. It's not my company. I had the suspicion, however, though, that this might not be what people are thinking about. Keep in mind that New Japan's recent shows in the States were, what was the title of them? What was the title of them again? Oh, Collision. Collision in DC, Collision in Philadelphia, right? Tony Khan late last year on one of those media scrums post pay-per-view. I think it may have been earlier, it may have been Revolution, but I remember watching him in the post media scrum saying that there was big news coming this year about a project that they were doing with New Japan Pro Wrestling. Now, I thought originally when he said that and they talked about the Honor Club that there would be some NJPW stuff on Honor Club. And I was like, okay, that's probably what it was. But Collision, Saturday show, AEW, the timing it's going to come out is around the time of Forbidden Door. I'm wondering if this AEW Collision show is going to be more about them doing partnership. Maybe the theme of the show, which this would be a cool idea. This is my idea. Don't take it with a grain of salt. But maybe the idea of the Collision show might be we bringing people from other companies to collide with our AEW stars. So we'll get a lot of more New Japan guys to do these two, and we'll get people from Impact, and maybe we'll get some more people. Well, of course, Bauer lets it from MLW, Billy Corgan from the NWA. Maybe we'll get some Joshi girls coming in, some Lucha Libre wrestlers coming in, and maybe that's what Collision is going to be. Maybe the theme of the show is going to be it's AEW versus other promotions bringing it in, and maybe in New Japan will obviously be a prominent one with that. So it's like an ongoing Forbidden Door, because one of the things about Forbidden Door is that a lot of the AEW, I'd say at least half of the AEW fan base pays lip service to watching New Japan, but most of them don't. So because they just don't want to put the effort in to get New Japan World or watching Axis or whatever it is. So this will be a way to kind of wrap these guys from these other promotions in, and instead of it being, well, who's that guy? Who's that guy? Who's that guy? Some nobody. Oh, I don't know the storyline. Now you'll have an AEW Collision to wrap it in there. Now, if that's the idea they're going with, I think it'd be great. If it's a roster split, not so much. Other fans have said that maybe this is too much television, oversaturation. I don't know about that. Again, I'm going to go back to my old school ways. Because they're like, well, you'll have 3 hours of Raw and 2 hours of SmackDown and NXT, and then you got Dynamite and Rampage and now Collision. It's just too much. And I'm like, well, again, I came up as a wrestling fan in the mid to late 80s. And let me tell you what the schedule was in the mid to late 80s as a wrestling fan. We had primetime wrestling on Mondays for 2 hours. We had Superstars of Wrestling on Saturdays. We had Wrestling Challenge on Sundays. These are all WWF shows. You also had TNT, Tuesday Night Titans, for a while, which was basically Vince McMahon doing his Johnny Carson rendition. You had All American Wrestling that airs Sunday mornings on the USA Network. So that's about 6 hours there. Then, and this is the 80s, by the way. And then that's not even counting Crockett, the NWA, which would become WCW. They had obviously the 6:05 show on TBS on Saturdays. That was 2 hours usually. You had, and in my area, we had syndication. So we had, for those of you who are younger, you had syndicated channels, which were on a separate band than your regular TV channels. And here in Baltimore, it was WNUV and WBFF. And WBFF 45 at noon after Saturday morning cartoons, that would be WWF Superstars. But at 1 o'clock on WNUV, they'd have NWA Pro Wrestling. Sunday, you have on WBFF At noon, WWF Superstar Wrestling Challenge. And at 1 o'clock on WNUV, you had NWA Worldwide Wrestling, which later became WCW Worldwide, which a lot of people remember. So that right there, that's 4 hours. The NWA/WCW in the late 80s also had this show called Power Hour. It was every Friday. I think it was about 10 o'clock. Sounds familiar. Like a different show. And actually, that's the kind of the thing about AEW Rampage. I've said to many people before, I was like, it's kind of like WCW's Power Hour more than it is Thunder. I mean, WCW had a show on Fridays at 10 o'clock back in the late 80s, early 90s called Power Hour, which is very similar in format to what AEW Rampage is. Now, if you also throw in a clash, if there was a Clash of the Champions from WCW that week or a Saturday Night's Main Event from WWF that week, you know, you're right there on an average week, you got about 12 to 15 hours of wrestling on. And that's, again, this is the 80s, so that's not even counting the AWA when they were running their stuff. Some of us I got USWA, I got Global Wrestling Federation in syndication for a year or two here. We got some people later in the 90s, you got ECW in syndication for some places. One of my favorites, the reason why I am such a wrestling historian, was ESPN. Monday through Friday would air Legends of World Class Championship Wrestling right after school. So I would come home from school, and basically what that show was is that they were re-airing full 1 hour episodes of World Class Championship television from like 82 to 84, 85. This is the late 80s. This is like 5 years removed from that. 5 years removed from World Class's heyday. And they would show one episode every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the other cool thing, and I'm gushing about Legends of World Class for a second, the other thing I loved about the Legends of World Class, especially at that time, was that I got to see wrestlers I knew from WWF and WCW, 5, 6, 7 years earlier. They were in this place called World Class. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. That's Ravishing Rick Rude, Roode. Yeah, Rude. Rick Rude was there. The One Man Gang was there. Kamala was there. Of course, many people know that The Undertaker, when he was Mark Calloway, cut his teeth in World Class at the Sportatorium. Stone Cold Steve Austin Stunning Steve Austin cut his teeth there at the Sportatorium in World Class Championship Wrestling. Obviously, that's where the Texas Tornado, Kerry Von Erich came from. I got to see the Von Erich Freebird feud, the love triangle between Jimmy Garvin with Precious and Sunshine. And not only did I get to see where a lot of the Dingo Warrior, the Ultimate Warrior was a Dingo Warrior there originally. And not only did I get to see a lot of these wrestlers I knew from other places, but I got to see a lot of wrestlers who just never went anywhere else or weren't big stars anywhere else. But in World Class Championship Wrestling, they were huge. Guys like Wild Bill Irwin, Iceman King Parsons, Gentleman Chris Adams. And I think a lot of that influence and that little show that aired for a couple years on ESPN is the reason why my perspective of wrestling is the way that it is. Because I, at an early age, saw that, so a guy can be in a different company and the company might be a better fit for them. And they will be a big star, feel like a big star. They are a big star in one company, but if they go to WCW or to WWF, maybe they're not as big a star there. Or maybe they don't know how to book them, or they don't feel right, or they're past their prime, or whatever it is. So the whole thing about too much wrestling with a new AEW show, you don't have to watch them all. I mean, if Collision's really good, then you probably will watch it. It's a lot of wrestling, but at some point in time, you got to pick and choose, and I definitely pick and choose. Like, I haven't watched MLW in about a year. I liked MLW, but just don't have time to do it. Sometimes I watch Rampage, sometimes I don't. I rarely ever watch a WWE weekly show. I used to watch NXT every week. I don't watch NXT every single week anymore. Wrestling, again, I've said it numerous times on this channel. I would prefer wrestling be a genre like any other genre. Like we have nobody complains about the number of game shows on, or the number of America's Got Talent, or You've Got Talent shows that are on the air, or the number of soap operas, or the number of news programs. Wrestling should be just like one of those. It should be a staple of entertainment, that there are multiple shows on every single week, not just one show on Mondays. And that is my 2 cents on that. So there's a lot more to cover. There's a lot more I wrote down that I want to talk about, but this video is getting pretty long in the tooth. So I'm going to cut it off here, but I want to know what you guys think about some of these subjects. Let your voice be heard in the comment box below. We got a lot to talk about WWE. I ain't even talked about it yet. The whole fallout from the Cody thing, and Corey Graves is throwing shade at the women's division, and all kinds of crazy stuff's going on over there. But we have plenty to talk about because, guys, I do think we're about to hit one of the greatest summers in wrestling history between all the big major companies. But again, I will see you guys here for more news, rumors, and commentary on the Rantin Review Pro Wrestling. Have a good day.